Elaine Patterson's neighbors in Naples, Florida, often said she lived in the kind of house that looked too quiet for its size. A sprawling stucco villa with white shutters and a manicured lawn, it was the sort of place meant to hold laughter, family dinners, grandchildren running through the hallways. But since her husband Robert had passed from a sudden heart attack nearly a decade earlier, the home felt more like a mausoleum than a sanctuary. At 60 years old, Elaine carried her grief like a carefully folded scarf, visible if you looked close, but tucked away enough to keep her moving through the motions of life. Her children had long since built lives of their own. One was in Chicago, the other in Seattle, both busy raising families and chasing careers. They called, they visited on holidays, but Elaine felt the ache of absence every single day. When she woke in the morning, the king-size bed was cold on one side. When she cooked, the meal seemed too large for a table of one. And when she looked in the mirror, she saw a woman who had been faithful to one man her whole life, now left behind in a world that felt faster, louder, and lonelier than she ever imagined. Friends told her she should be content. After all, she had comfort, security, and a sort of bank account that cushioned her from the worries that plagued so many others. But Elaine didn't want to just survive her later years. She wanted to feel alive again. She wanted companionship, romance, the kind of thrill she thought was reserved for the young. Some whispered that was foolish, that women her age should focus on hobbies, grandchildren, or church socials. But Elaine wasn't ready to accept that her story was over. One afternoon, with the Florida sun burning through her living room blinds, she caught her reflection and realized how much of herself she had let go. Her shoulders slouched, her hair had gone untouched for months, and her dresses hung loose like they belonged to someone else. She decided, with the kind of sudden clarity grief sometimes brings, that she wasn't going to waste any more years watching the world pass by. So she joined a gym. It was a move that shocked her circle of friends. Elaine had never been the type to sweat in front of strangers. But there she was, signing up for a membership, stepping into a world of pounding music, gleaming weights, and bodies much younger than hers. At first, she felt out of place, an older widow in a room full of toned 20 and 30-somethings. Then she met Diego Morales. He was 25, tall, with a smile that carried a kind of practiced warmth. His skin was sun-kissed, his muscles carved from the kind of discipline Elaine had never known. Diego was a personal trainer at the gym, always moving between clients with energy that seemed limitless. When he approached her, "Need a hand with that machine?" Elaine felt her face flush like she was a girl again. From that first moment, Diego made her feel seen. He asked about her day, remembered small details, and never treated her like the older woman in the corner trying to keep up. Instead, he treated her like she mattered. Elaine found herself looking forward to their sessions, not just for the exercise, but for the way Diego's laughter filled the quiet corners of her heart. Soon, coffee after workouts turned into dinners. Conversations that began with reps and cardio drifted into life stories. Elaine told him about losing Robert, about the loneliness of a house too big for one person. Diego told her about growing up in Mexico, about his dreams of building a fitness brand, about wanting more than just scraping by. He looked at her with eyes that sparkled, and Elaine, despite every rational voice in her head, believed that maybe, just maybe, fate had brought her a second chance. When she introduced Diego to her friends, the reactions were swift and cutting. "Elaine, he's younger than your son. Be careful, honey. Men like that know exactly what they're doing." Some joked behind her back, calling him a boy toy, whispering that he was only after her money. But Elaine brushed them off. Hadn't she always been practical, cautious, reserved? For once in her life, she wanted to follow her heart, not her head. She remembered sitting across from Diego at a waterfront restaurant one evening, the sunset painting his face gold. He reached for her hand and said, "Age doesn't matter when two people connect. You've given me more than anyone my age ever could. Real love, real care." Elaine swallowed those words like they were gospel. For the first time since Robert's death, she felt wanted, desired, cherished. And in those moments, the warnings of others melted away. She wasn't just Elaine Patterson, the wealthy widow of Naples. She was a woman alive again, glowing with possibility, daring to believe that love had come knocking at her door a second time. What she didn't know, what she couldn't imagine, was that the knock she answered wasn't love at all. It was danger dressed in charm, betrayal hidden behind a perfect smile. Elaine had always been the type of woman who carried herself with quiet grace. But after Diego came into her life, people began to notice something different. She laughed more. She wore brighter colors. Her hair, once left to grow in soft grays, was styled again, streaked with a hint of blonde. There was a sparkle in her eyes that hadn't been there since Robert was alive. To her, Diego wasn't just a lover. He was proof that life didn't have to end at 60. When she invited him to Sunday brunch with her friends at the yacht club, Elaine couldn't wait to show him off. He arrived in a crisp button-down, sleeves rolled up to reveal his sculpted arms, flashing that smile that could win over any room. The younger women at the club stared with thinly veiled envy. The older ones whispered behind champagne flutes. Diego played his part effortlessly, pulling out Elaine's chair, refilling her glass, and talking about future plans as if he was already part of her family. But beneath the table, her closest friend, Marjorie, leaned in and whispered, "Elaine, sweetie, he's beautiful. But don't you think he's a little too beautiful?" Elaine brushed it off with a polite smile, unwilling to let the doubt creep in. Over the following weeks, the whispers grew louder. Friends warned her in private, reminding her that stories of younger men preying on wealthy widows weren't just gossip, they were headlines. Elaine insisted they didn't understand. "He loves me for who I am," she said, "not for what I have." Yet deep inside, a small part of her knew their concern came from love, not jealousy. Still, she couldn't let go of what Diego made her feel. Diego knew how to play the game. He didn't just shower Elaine with attention. He made himself useful. He accompanied her to charity galas, carried her bags during shopping trips, and even helped repair small things around her home. He was charming with her friends' husbands, attentive to their wives, and always made sure to thank Elaine publicly for everything, from dinner dates to weekends at the beach house. One night, after too many glasses of wine, Elaine confessed to him how lonely she had been since Robert's death, how she often felt invisible. Diego kissed her hand and said, "I see you, Elaine. I see everything that makes you extraordinary." Those words cut through her doubts like a hot knife through butter. She believed him. Her friends, however, weren't convinced. When word spread that Elaine had paid for Diego's certification courses and a high-end laptop for his business plans, the criticism sharpened. "Elaine, this is textbook," Marjorie scolded over the phone. "First it's little expenses, then it's cars and condos. He's using you." Elaine's voice trembled but stayed firm. "You don't know him like I do. Diego isn't like that." The truth was, Elaine wanted to believe. Every woman wants to be loved for more than her wallet, more than her age. For years she'd been defined by loss. Diego offered her a chance to be defined by desire again. By spring, Diego suggested they take a trip together, somewhere special, just the two of them. "Cancun," he said, eyes gleaming. "White sand, turquoise water. We deserve this." To prove his commitment, he promised to plan everything. The hotel, the excursions, the dinners. All Elaine had to do was relax and let him take care of her. It sounded romantic, and Elaine, swept up in the fantasy, agreed. She pulled money from her accounts to cover the resort and flights. Her children, hearing about the trip, were less enthusiastic. Her daughter's voice over the phone was sharp with worry. "Mom, he's half your age. You've known him, what, 8 months? And now you're taking him to Mexico on your dime? Don't you think this is moving too fast?" Elaine bristled. "I'm not a child, Caroline. I know what I'm doing." But when she hung up, her hand lingered on the receiver, trembling. At the farewell dinner before the trip, Marjorie gave her one last warning. "If he's real, Elaine, I'll eat my hat. But I've seen men like him before. Please, don't put your heart and your money on the line without knowing who he really is." Elaine forced a laugh, though her throat tightened. That night, alone in her villa, she opened her jewelry drawer and looked at the diamond necklace Robert had once given her. She wondered what he would think if he could see her now, packing bikinis and sundresses for a beach vacation with a man 35 years younger. Would he call her foolish? Or would he be glad she had found something resembling joy again? Elaine chose to believe the latter. She zipped up her suitcase, convinced that Cancun would be the trip that silenced the doubts of everyone around her. What she didn't realize was that the people who doubted her weren't the enemy. The true danger was the man sharing her bed, the man smiling as he printed out boarding passes, the man who, even then, was already thinking less about love and more about what he stood to gain when the vacation was over. Cancun was everything the brochures promised. Sun that painted the ocean in shades of gold at dawn, beaches lined with palm trees swaying in the breeze, resorts gleaming like palaces built for fantasies. For Elaine, stepping off the plane felt like walking into a second youth. She wore a wide-brimmed hat, a flowing sundress, and sandals that clicked lightly on the tiled floors of the airport. Beside her, Diego walked tall, his skin catching the light, every bit the image of the attentive younger man. Passers-by glanced at them, some with admiration, some with judgment, but Elaine didn't care. She had chosen happiness, and here it was, unfolding under the Mexican sun. Their resort was a sprawling paradise with infinity pools overlooking the ocean, five-star restaurants serving fresh seafood, and staff who greeted guests with champagne flutes the moment they arrived. Diego wrapped his arm around Elaine's shoulders as they checked in, whispering, "This is just the beginning, mi amor. Just you and me, no one else." Elaine blushed like she hadn't in decades. The first few days felt like something out of a movie. They lounged on cabanas by the beach, their cocktails sweating in the heat. They swam in turquoise water, Diego always swimming far ahead, slicing through the waves like a shark, while Elaine trailed behind, laughing breathlessly. At night, they dined under lantern light, the sound of the waves providing a lullaby as Diego toasted to new beginnings. Elaine thought she had never been so happy. But cracks in the dream appeared quickly. On their third night, Elaine woke up to find Diego gone. The sheets beside her were still warm, but his phone charger sat unplugged on the nightstand. She padded barefoot across the room, the marble floor cool against her skin, and stepped onto the balcony. The pool below glowed electric blue, but Diego was nowhere in sight. Her heart thudded with an unease she tried to dismiss. When he returned an hour later, smelling faintly of cologne and cigarettes, Elaine asked, "Where were you?" Diego smiled, kissed her forehead, and said, "Just needed some air, baby. You worry too much." His charm smoothed over her questions, but sleep did not come easily to Elaine after that. The following day, while Diego disappeared again to check the gym facilities, Elaine lingered at the pool bar. There, she struck up conversation with another guest, a woman from New Jersey, dripping in diamonds, with a laugh as sharp as broken glass. The woman lowered her sunglasses and asked, "Isn't that the same trainer who was with that woman from Dallas last month? What's his name?" "Diego." Elaine forced a smile, but her stomach clenched. Later, she found Diego chatting with a resort hostess, his hand brushing the woman's arm a little too casually. When Elaine approached, Diego slipped seamlessly into his role, wrapping an arm around her waist and kissing her temple as if nothing had happened. But the look in the hostess's eyes lingered in Elaine's mind long after they walked away. That night, over dinner, Elaine couldn't help herself. "Are you seeing other women?" she asked, her voice trembling. Diego set down his glass and looked at her as if wounded. "Elaine, how could you even say that? After everything I've given up to be here with you." His tone was soft, but beneath it she felt the heat of irritation, like she had crossed an invisible line. He reached across the table, took her hand, and said, "You're all I want. Don't let jealous people poison this. They don't understand us." Elaine swallowed the words like medicine, convincing herself they would heal the doubt growing in her chest. Still, the signs piled up. He guarded his phone like a hawk, stepping away whenever it buzzed. He returned to the room late, claiming he'd been networking with potential clients. And one evening, when Elaine walked into the hotel lounge unexpectedly, she caught the tail end of Diego whispering into his phone, "Don't worry, she trusts me." When he noticed her, he snapped the phone shut so quickly it nearly slipped from his hand. Elaine laughed it off, though the sound caught in her throat. She told herself she was being paranoid, that she had spent too many years alone, too many nights second-guessing herself. Diego was young, energetic, sociable. Of course he'd have friends. Of course he'd have things she didn't understand. What mattered was that at the end of the day, he was with her. Wasn't he? But the truth pressed on her like the heat of the Cancun sun. Diego was slipping away, not toward freedom, but towards something darker. And though Elaine didn't know it yet, every romantic stroll on the beach, every whispered, "I love you," every glass raised in a toast was not proof of devotion. They were rehearsal, practice for the performance Diego needed her to believe in before he stepped into his real role. Elaine, blinded by love, kept telling herself that the unease in her chest was just insecurity. She didn't realize she was walking side by side with a predator, one who had already started measuring the weight of her trust against the fortune he believed would soon be his. Elaine had always prided herself on being composed, a woman who knew how to control her emotions. But the longer she stayed in Cancun with Diego, the harder the composure became to maintain. The uneasy questions piling up in her mind. Where did he go at night? Why did he hide his phone? Why did he seem to slip so easily into the company of other women? Were no longer whispers. They were alarms, screaming louder with each passing day. The breaking point came one humid evening after dinner. They had just finished a candlelit meal at the resort's rooftop restaurant, with the ocean sprawling endlessly beyond the terrace. Elaine, fueled by wine and months of doubt, finally asked the question she had been rehearsing for days. Her voice shook, but it was firm enough to slice through the sound of the waves. "Diego, tell me the truth. Who are you texting at night?" Diego froze mid-sip. For a moment, his mask slipped, and Elaine saw the irritation flash in his eyes. But then, just as quickly, he replaced it with a laugh. "Really, Elaine? We're in paradise, and you want to ruin it with jealousy." "It's not jealousy," she shot back, louder than she intended. "It's common sense. I see the way women look at you. I've seen you with them, and you hide your phone from me. What am I supposed to think?" For the first time since she had met him, Diego didn't bother to charm her. He set his glass down with a hard clink and leaned in close, his voice dropping into something colder. "You're supposed to trust me. If you don't, maybe this isn't worth it." Elaine's breath caught. There it was, the threat of abandonment, the weapon she feared most. She had given so much already, her money, her trust, her reputation. The thought of losing him, of being left alone again, felt unbearable. Tears welled in her eyes as she tried to salvage the moment. "I do trust you. I need to know I'm not being foolish." Diego softened then, reaching across the table to take her hand. His thumbs stroked her skin with rehearsed tenderness. "Mi amor, you're not foolish. I've never cared for anyone the way I care for you." He leaned in, kissing her knuckles, and for a brief second, Elaine let herself believe. But later that night, when Diego stepped onto the balcony to make yet another whispered phone call, Elaine sat on the bed and stared at the wall, her chest tight. His words felt empty, rehearsed, like lines from a play he had performed 100 times before. The next morning, Elaine made a decision. She called her financial advisor back in Florida. In a lowered voice, she asked about the paperwork she had filed weeks earlier, updating her life insurance policy to add Diego as a beneficiary. "Is it finalized?" she asked. When the advisor confirmed, her stomach twisted. She hung up quickly, glancing toward the bathroom where Diego was showering. Why had she done it? Why had she allowed a man she had known less than a year to have access to everything she had built over decades? She told herself it was a gesture of love, proof of commitment. But now, in the harsh morning light, it felt like she had handed him the keys to her coffin. That day, her tension boiled over. On the beach, as they walked along the surf, Elaine stopped and turned to him, her voice sharp. "If you're using me, Diego, I'll find out. Don't think I won't." He stopped too, the waves lapping at his ankles. His jaw tightened. For a moment, his expression hardened into something she had never seen before, something predatory. Then just as quickly, the smile returned. "Why do you talk like that? Do you think I'd ever hurt you?" Elaine's heart pounded. She wanted to step back, but his hand was already on her arm, firm, almost possessive. He squeezed just a little too hard before letting go. "You worry too much," he said, voice calm again. "I'm here, with you. Isn't that enough?" But it wasn't. Not anymore. That night, Elaine lay awake beside him, her eyes fixed on the ceiling fan as it turned lazily above. Every small gesture, his hand brushing hers, his whisper of good night, felt like a performance. She began to wonder if Diego had ever loved her at all, or if love had just been the bait on the hook. And Diego, lying with his back to her, eyes open in the dark, was wondering something else entirely. He was running numbers in his head, her accounts, her policies, her jewelry. He was imagining what life would look like without Elaine, what doors would open if she simply weren't here anymore. The distance between them that night was more than the width of a mattress. It was the chasm between trust and betrayal, between love and survival. And in that silence, something dangerous began to bloom. Elaine's desperation to hold on, and Diego's cold calculation of how to let go. The night that sealed Elaine Patterson's fate was wrapped in beauty so deceptive it could have been designed by the devil himself. The resort's private beach stretched out in silence, the moon hanging low over the Caribbean, casting a silver glow across the water. Couples lingered near tiki torches, laughing, holding hands, sipping the last of their margaritas. To anyone passing by, it was paradise. To Elaine, it was her final attempt at saving what she thought was still real between her and Diego. She had dressed carefully, slipping into a flowing white dress that Robert once told her made her look timeless. She wanted Diego to see her that way, not as an aging widow clinging to youth, but as a woman worthy of love. Diego, of course, looked effortlessly striking in a fitted linen shirt, his skin bronzed from days under the Mexican sun. As they walked toward the shore, Elaine's heart beat with hope and dread all at once. "I thought we could talk," she said softly, her sandals sinking into the sand. Diego nodded, his face unreadable. "We're always talking, mi amor. What more do you want?" "Honesty," Elaine whispered, her voice almost breaking. "I just need to know I'm not alone in this, that I haven't made a mistake." For a fleeting second, she thought she saw something flicker in his eyes, regret, maybe, or hesitation. But it passed quickly, replaced by the same rehearsed warmth he always summoned when she questioned him. "You're not alone. You have me. Always." He reached for her hand, but his grip was cold, firm in a way that felt more like restraint than comfort. Still, Elaine clung to it. She didn't see the storm gathering in his chest, didn't hear the roar of thoughts inside his head, calculations, greed, impatience. Diego had grown tired of the charade. He had what he needed, access to her accounts, his name written neatly on her life insurance. And with every day that passed, the risk of discovery grew. They walked further down, away from the glow of the resort lights, until the only sound was the rush of the waves. The sand was damp and cool beneath their feet, and the shadows stretched long, swallowing them whole. Elaine stopped, turning to face him. The moon lit her face in silver, her eyes wide, fragile. "Diego," she said, her voice trembling, "please tell me this isn't just about money." The words hit him harder than she knew. For a moment, his chest tightened. He almost considered telling the truth, not out of guilt, but out of exhaustion. But then he thought of the accounts, the luxury waiting just within reach. A life without limits, funded by the woman standing in front of him. He couldn't let slip away. So he smiled, and while she softened under it, believing once again, he moved behind her under the guise of an embrace. Elaine closed her eyes, inhaling the salt air, feeling his arms wrap around her shoulders. For a brief, blissful instant, she believed they had found their way back. But then his grip tightened. At first, she thought it was playfulness, Diego being rough in a way that reminded her of his youth. But the pressure on her throat came fast, sharp, relentless. Her eyes flew open, her hands clawing at his forearm. The sound that left her mouth was strangled, carried off by the wind before it could become a scream. "Shh!" Diego hissed, his jaw clenched, his body rigid behind hers. It'll be quick. Elaine's mind raced, flashes of her life bursting like fireworks. Robert's laugh, her children's first steps, the brunches with Marjorie, the quiet mornings alone in her villa. She fought with everything she had, kicking, thrashing, clawing at his skin. Her nails left angry red marks, but Diego's grip was iron. The waves seemed to roar louder, as if the ocean itself was protesting. Her legs gave out first, sand spraying as her knees buckled. The edges of her vision darkened, stars bursting against the night sky. She tried to form his name one last time, to plead, to remind him she was human, not a prize to be cashed in. But no sound came. Her body went limp in his arms. Diego held her there for a moment, panting, sweat beading on his forehead. He looked down at her lifeless face, her mouth parted, her eyes half open to the moon. And for the briefest second, he felt something like fear. Not guilt, never guilt, but fear of what would happen if he failed to make this look convincing. Quickly, he dragged her toward the water's edge, the waves lapping hungrily at her dress. He positioned her body so it looked as though she had stumbled and drowned. He brushed sand over the drag marks, checked the shoreline for footprints. He stepped back, breathing heavily, admiring his work like a craftsman finishing a project. To anyone who found her, it would look like a tragic accident. A widow on vacation, a little too much wine, a slip into the sea. That was the story Diego would tell. That was the story he needed the world to believe. But the ocean has a way of refusing to keep secrets. And the marks on Elaine Patterson's neck would soon betray him in a way his smile never could. At dawn, the resort buzzed with panic. A maintenance worker spotted Elaine's body floating near the rocks, her white dress tangled like seaweed in the surf. Security rushed to the scene, radios crackling in Spanish and English, tourists gathering with horrified whispers. Diego arrived moments later, his performance already rehearsed. He stumbled toward her, shouting her name, dropping to his knees in the wet sand. Elaine. Oh God, no, Elaine. His voice cracked at all the right places, his hands shaking dramatically as staff pulled him back. To anyone watching, he looked like the devastated younger lover, robbed of his soulmate by a cruel accident of the sea. Within hours, Diego slipped seamlessly into his next role, the grieving partner handling responsibilities. He gave statements to local authorities, weaving a story of too much wine, a midnight walk, Elaine stumbling into the waves while he was just steps behind. He insisted he tried to save her, but the tide was too strong. He dabbed at his eyes with a folded napkin, making sure every tear seemed authentic. When investigators released the body to the U.S. consulate, Diego shifted focus. He called Elaine's financial advisor, his voice breaking. She's gone. I don't know what to do, but she wanted me taken care of. She added me to her policy, didn't she? The advisor, unsettled by his eagerness, confirmed the documents but explained the claim process would take time. That wasn't enough for Diego. He wanted money fast. He began liquidating anything he could touch. Elaine's credit cards, tucked neatly in her wallet, were swiped for luxury watches, designer clothes, and first-class flight upgrades. He contacted her bank to arrange transfers, spinning a story about needing emergency access as her partner. The charm that had once melted Elaine now turned on bank representatives and insurance agents. Back at the resort, however, cracks were already forming. Staff quietly noted how calm he seemed once the initial shock had passed. A bartender remembered seeing him later that same day, ordering expensive tequila shots and flirting with a pair of women by the pool. To some, it looked like grief. To others, it looked like celebration. Diego didn't care. In his mind, the plan was flawless. Elaine was gone, the paperwork in his favor, and soon the money would flow. With it, he pictured a new life in Spain or Italy, nights in penthouses, women who adored him, freedom from ever working another day. He told himself he deserved it. Hadn't he endured months of pretending? Months of listening to Elaine's stories of loss, holding her hand, playing the role of doting partner? He saw her death not as murder, but as payoff. Still, he moved quickly. He booked a one-way ticket to Madrid, claiming to hotel staff he couldn't bear to stay where Elaine had died. He packed the gift she had bought him, gold cufflinks, a new laptop, tailored shirts, and left her belongings for the consulate to handle. He made calls to insurance companies from the airport lounge, pushing for expedited processing. What Diego didn't know was that his greed was already betraying him. The bank flagged suspicious withdrawals from Elaine's account. Large sums moved within hours of her death. The insurance company, seeing a brand new beneficiary attempting to file a claim days after a suspicious drowning, alerted investigators. Even hotel security began combing through footage, disturbed by inconsistencies in his timeline. Meanwhile, Elaine's friends back in Florida received the devastating call. Marjorie, her closest confidant, was unconvinced from the start. Elaine was cautious, she told reporters later. She would never wander drunk into the ocean in the middle of the night. And if she did, Diego would have been right there. None of it made sense. As Diego sipped champagne in the airport lounge, rehearsing how he would charm European women with his new fortune, Mexican authorities were already moving. Forensic specialists had examined Elaine's body and found bruises on her neck, finger-shaped bruises inconsistent with drowning. The illusion of an accident was collapsing, and Diego was still within their reach. He boarded his flight with a smile, convinced the world had handed him everything. But cameras at the airport had recorded his every move. Customs officers had been tipped off. The story Diego Morales had written for himself, wealth, freedom, escape, was about to collide with the story the evidence was writing against him. Elaine Patterson's final act of love, trusting too much, was about to become the very rope that dragged her killer back into the hands of justice. The illusion of a tragic accident unraveled almost as quickly as Diego Morales had staged it. When Elaine Patterson's body was transported to the morgue in Cancun, the forensic pathologist expected to find the typical signs of drowning: water in the lungs, frothy fluid, swollen airways. Instead, what appeared on the examination table told an entirely different story. There was water in Elaine's system, yes, but it was minimal. The true evidence screamed louder: deep bruising along her neck in the shape of fingers. Her hyoid bone, a delicate structure in the throat, was fractured, something almost never seen in accidental drownings. There were abrasions on her arms, defensive wounds suggesting she had fought back against an assailant. And beneath her fingernails, forensic technicians discovered skin cells that would later match Diego's DNA. The medical examiner's report was unequivocal: homicide by strangulation. The drowning had been staged. Meanwhile, investigators began piecing together surveillance from the resort. At first glance, Diego's story held that they had walked on the beach together, that Elaine had fallen into the water while he rushed to get help. But the cameras painted a damning timeline. Footage from the lobby showed Diego leading Elaine toward the beach just after midnight. 2 hours later, cameras captured him returning alone. He didn't look frantic, as one might expect from a man who had just lost his partner. Instead, he walked calmly, glancing at his phone, even stopping to chat briefly with a security guard. One of the investigators, Detective Juan Rivera of the Cancun Policia Turistica, later said, "His body language told the story before we even pulled the footage. That was not a man who had just watched his lover drown. That was a man already thinking about his next move." And Diego's next moves only strengthened the case against him. Financial records revealed attempts to transfer large sums from Elaine's accounts within 24 hours of her death. He called her insurance company repeatedly, pressing for confirmation of his beneficiary status. Airline records showed he had purchased a one-way ticket to Madrid with Elaine's credit card just days later. Back in Florida, Elaine's friends were adamant when questioned by U.S. authorities. She loved the ocean, yes, Marjorie told detectives, but she wasn't careless. And if she'd had too much to drink, she would have gone straight to bed. She wasn't some reckless teenager. Her children echoed the same. To them, the idea of their mother wandering drunk into the waves was insulting, a lie that only pointed to Diego. The FBI became involved once evidence suggested premeditated financial fraud spanning across U.S. accounts. Working with Mexican authorities, they compiled a chilling narrative. A young trainer who had charmed a wealthy widow, secured his place in her financial future, then orchestrated her death once his name was written into her will and insurance policies. When police caught up with Diego at Cancun International Airport, he was moments away from boarding his flight to Madrid. He wore designer sunglasses and carried a sleek leather bag stuffed with cash, jewelry, and a brand-new laptop Elaine had purchased for him. Officers surrounded him at the gate. Passengers stared as the young man with a movie star smile was handcuffed and led away, shouting in Spanish and English that it was all a mistake, that Elaine's death was a terrible accident. But the evidence mounted higher than his protests. The bruises on Elaine's neck, the DNA under her nails, the surveillance footage, the suspicious financial activity, the testimonies of friends who had warned her. Piece by piece, it formed an airtight case. In interrogation, Diego tried to maintain his innocence, claiming Elaine had been unstable, that she drank heavily that night, and lashed out at him when he tried to guide her back to the room. She fell, he insisted. But the FBI, now coordinating with Mexican authorities, confronted him with contradictions. Flight records showed he had booked his escape ticket hours before Elaine was even found. His phone logs revealed he texted another woman in Miami only minutes after leaving the beach, telling her he would soon be rich. When pressed with these inconsistencies, Diego shifted his story 3 times in the span of one interview, each version contradicting the last. Prosecutors later said it was those contradictions, more than any forensic report, that destroyed his credibility with the jury. But when detectives confronted him with the fracture in her throat, his story crumbled. He had no answer. By the time Diego was extradited to the U.S. to face charges, the media had seized the story. Headlines blared across Florida and beyond. Widow's vacation turns deadly. Boy toy or cold-blooded killer. Tabloids painted lurid portraits of their May-December romance, while true crime programs dissected the case as a cautionary tale about love, money, and manipulation. The evidence would follow Diego into the courtroom, where his carefully crafted image of the doting young partner would finally collapse under the weight of science, video, and motive. For all the charm he had wielded so easily in life, in death Elaine Patterson had left behind something more powerful, the undeniable truth written on her very body. And that truth pointed directly, irrevocably, to Diego Morales. The trial of Diego Morales drew attention far beyond the borders of Florida. By the time jury selection began, the story of a young personal trainer who seduced and then killed his 60-year-old lover had become a national obsession. News vans crowded outside the courthouse in Fort Myers, reporters jostling for position, true crime podcasts dissecting every new detail. To some, Diego was the perfect villain, handsome, manipulative, cold. To others, he was a tragic figure, a man caught between love and desperation. But inside the courtroom, the only question that mattered was whether he had murdered Elaine Patterson in cold blood. The prosecution wasted no time painting Diego as a predator. Assistant State Attorney Carla Mendoza stood before the jury with a photo of Elaine, smiling in her white dress just days before her death. She believed she had found love, Mendoza said, her voice steady. Instead, she found a con artist who saw her not as a woman, but as a bank account. And when he realized he could profit more from her death than her life, he made a choice to kill. She laid out the evidence piece by piece. The bruises on Elaine's neck, the fracture in her throat, the defensive wounds on her arms. The resort security footage showing Diego returning alone hours before he claimed. The suspicious financial activity immediately after her death. The life insurance policy updated only weeks earlier. And perhaps most chilling of all, the DNA beneath Elaine's fingernails that matched Diego's skin. When the prosecution played footage from the resort's lobby camera, the jury watched Diego guide Elaine toward the beach, his hand at the small of her back. Minutes later, he returned alone, glancing casually at his phone. The image was devastating. The contrast between a woman walking toward her final moments and a man strolling back without a care. The defense fought hard, led by attorney Mark Easton, who tried to spin the narrative of a tragic accident. He argued that Elaine had been drinking heavily, that she stumbled into the water in the dark, and that Diego's attempts to save her had been unsuccessful. This was not murder, Easton insisted. This was a misfortune, a cruel twist of fate. He pointed to Diego's visible distress when authorities first pulled Elaine from the water, calling him a young man traumatized by loss. He suggested that the bruising could have been caused during frantic attempts to revive her. Love doesn't have an age limit, he told the jury. Their relationship may have been unconventional, but it was real, and tragedy should not be mistaken for crime. But the cross-examinations tore holes in Diego's defense. Forensic experts testified that the pressure required to fracture Elaine's throat bone could not have been accidental. The bruises, they said, were consistent with prolonged strangulation, not resuscitation. Bank officials detailed the speed and intensity with which Diego tried to access Elaine's accounts within hours of her death. A travel agent testified that Diego had booked a one-way ticket to Madrid the morning after her body was found. And then came the most powerful testimony, Elaine's daughter, Caroline. Standing just feet away from the man who had taken her mother's life, she spoke through tears. My mom was kind, generous, and lonely. She wanted to believe she could be loved again. He saw that. He saw her hope, her vulnerability, and he exploited it. He took advantage of her heart. And when she trusted him enough to share her life, he took her life instead. Jurors wiped their eyes as Caroline stepped down, her grief palpable. When Diego himself took the stand, hoping to sway the jury with charm, the gamble failed. Dressed in a crisp suit, he spoke smoothly at first, insisting that Elaine had been the love of his life. But under cross-examination, his facade cracked. When pressed on why he called insurance companies so quickly after her death, he stammered. When confronted with messages on his phone to other women, flirtatious notes sent even during the Cancun trip, he grew defensive, his voice rising. The image of the grieving lover gave way to flashes of arrogance and entitlement, and the jury noticed. After weeks of testimony, closing arguments sealed the narrative. The prosecution reminded jurors that Elaine's body told the story. Bruises, fractures, DNA. She fought for her life, Mendoza said, her voice breaking. And the marks she left behind are the proof of his guilt. Deliberations lasted less than a day. The jury returned with a unanimous verdict, guilty of first-degree murder and financial fraud. The judge, a stern figure unmoved by Diego's final plea for leniency, delivered the sentence. Life in prison without the possibility of parole. Gasps filled the courtroom. Elaine's children wept quietly, holding hands, while Marjorie whispered a prayer of thanks. Diego sat motionless, his jaw tight, the reality settling over him that the life of luxury he had envisioned had dissolved into the gray walls of a prison cell. Outside, cameras captured every reaction. Commentators called it the cautionary tale of the decade, a reminder of how easily love can be weaponized. For the public, it was the perfect storm of scandal. Money, sex, betrayal, murder. For Elaine's family, it was justice, bitter and incomplete, but justice all the same. Diego Morales left the courthouse in shackles, his smile gone, his future erased. And Elaine Patterson, though gone, had spoken louder than he ever could, through the bruises that betrayed his lies, and through the voices of those who loved her enough to demand the truth. The trial may have ended, but the shockwaves of Elaine Patterson's murder rippled far beyond the courtroom. In Florida, where she had lived for decades, her death became more than just a headline. It was a story people whispered about over morning coffee, a cautionary tale passed around at country clubs and church gatherings. Everyone knew someone like Elaine, a woman who had loved deeply, lost profoundly, and longed to feel alive again. Her fate left many older women in the community asking themselves uncomfortable questions about trust, vulnerability, and the risks of late-life romance. Elaine's children struggled to make peace with the outcome. Caroline, her daughter, spoke publicly after the sentencing, standing before reporters with a quiet strength. "We got justice," she said, her voice steady despite tears. But justice doesn't fill an empty chair at the table. Justice doesn't bring back a mother or a grandmother. What we hope is that her story keeps another woman from falling for the kind of man who sees love as a bank account. Her brother, less inclined to speak, stood beside her silently, his jaw tight with grief. Marjorie, Elaine's lifelong friend, turned her heartbreak into action. Within months of the verdict, she helped launch the Elaine Patterson Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to educating women about financial exploitation in relationships. The foundation's message spread quickly. Love does not mean handing over control of your future, and trust must be earned, not bought. Seminars and online resources taught women, particularly widows and divorcees, how to protect themselves legally and emotionally. The media, of course, feasted on the story. True crime documentaries replayed the surveillance footage. Talk shows dissected Diego's motives, and magazines ran glossy spreads about romance scams targeting older women. It became part of a larger conversation about age gap relationships and the dark side of desire. Some commentators condemned Elaine as foolish, blinded by vanity. Others defended her, pointing out that loneliness can make anyone vulnerable, no matter their age or wealth. For Diego, prison was not the glamorous escape he had once envisioned. Behind bars, his charm found no audience. Other inmates mocked him as the gigolo killer, a man who thought he could seduce his way into fortune but ended up in a cell. He filed appeals, claiming he had been misunderstood, but none gained traction. Over time, the world stopped caring about his excuses. The man who once dreamed of penthouses in Madrid now spent his days pushing a mop along prison hallways. His reflection in the dull tile floors a reminder of everything he had thrown away. Elaine's house in Naples stood quiet, the manicured lawn still trimmed, but the rooms inside felt like a museum of her absence. Family photos lined the mantel, her laughter frozen in frames, her presence now only in memories. Her children eventually sold the villa, choosing not to live among the ghosts. But the buyers, aware of its history, said neighbors still lowered their voices when pointing it out. In the end, Elaine's story lingered because it touched something raw in people. The fear of being deceived, the hope of being loved, the danger of ignoring red flags when the heart is desperate. Older women, widows, even men wrote letters to the Patterson family saying her story had opened their eyes. Some ended unhealthy relationships. Others sought legal advice before signing financial documents. Many admitted they had been close to falling for someone too good to be true. Her death became more than tragedy. It became warning. A reminder that predators often arrive not with weapons in hand, but with smiles, sweet words, and promises of forever. In the final analysis, Elaine Patterson's legacy was not defined by the man who betrayed her, but by the way her life and death awakened others. Her family kept her memory alive, not as the victim of a con, but as a woman who dared to believe in love, even when it cost her everything. And in that belief, painful though it was, she left behind a lesson America could not ignore. That sometimes the greatest danger is not found in dark alleys or empty streets, but in the arms of someone who whispers, "I love you," while quietly calculating how much your trust is worth. And on the shores of Cancun, where the tide still whispers against the sand, locals say the story of the American widow is never far from memory. They call it the beach where love drowned, and where trust cost a woman her life.